506 on 105.9 WMAL. Dan Mandis here in for Vince Coglianese. Want to welcome on into the program Adam Kredo, senior writer of foreign policy and national security for the Washington Free Beacon. I got to say, Adam, I'm not surprised when I see this headline, but let's fill in the details. Apparently, the Biden administration pushed through plans to distribute hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayer aid to the Palestinians, despite internal assessments that those plans could boost the Iranian-backed terrorist group Hamas. Let's talk about that because I believe, isn't that illegal to fund terrorist organizations?
It is, in fact, illegal to fund a terrorist organization. And what these documents show, these are, by the way, internal State Department emails that were produced in response to a lawsuit, a FOIA lawsuit. They were supposed to hand these over. They didn't. They went to court. They're forced to produce them. Now we are able to see them. And this is going all the way back to around March 2021, when the Biden administration is first taking office and first taking over the State Department. Aid to the Palestinians had been frozen for two reasons. One, the Trump administration didn't want to keep sending money to terrorists. Two, Congress had passed a bipartisan law that required the Palestinian Authority to stop paying terrorist salaries in order to receive U.S. aid. And naturally, the Palestinian Authority would not stop paying terrorists, so aid was, again, cut off because of that. So going back to 2021, what we find is when the Biden State Department is beginning to take over, they're preparing a draft request to the Treasury Department to get a license that would exempt them from applicable anti-terrorism laws to allow them to restart aid. And within that assessment, they put that it certainly has a high risk, as they said, to make its way to Hamas, but their foreign policy objectives are more important, mainly bolstering the Palestinian Authority and restarting aid, so they move forward with it.
So I'm a little lost for words, which is not a great thing because I'm a talk show host, but the State Department, they literally told the Biden administration they have concerns. And by the way, we're talking about, is it $360 million? Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, that was the initial tranche of money. Actually, it was about $70 million, and then they piled on top of it through a bunch of different silos, being COVID relief, disaster relief. You know, they figured out their ways to get the money over there, and it totaled early on just under $400 million, and it's continued to flow since then.
So I guess the question is there any indication as to, why exactly is it that they ignored their own State Department concerns that this money, this millions of dollars, would end up in terrorist hands? Why is it that they decided to ignore their own warnings?
Yeah, I do think that there's a pretty simple explanation from the 50,000-foot perspective, and it's something you also see with their other foreign policy decisions, such as giving Iran $6 billion for hostages, trying to reopen that nuclear deal with Iran, and a host of other things they've done, particularly in the Middle East. This is forwarding their foreign policy objectives. They're not going to let the facts and the reality on the ground stand in the way of what they want to carry out with their foreign policy. And that's stated very clearly in these FOIA emails that in kind of an unusual thing, now this is a little technical, but bear with me, in kind of an unusual request, the State Department actually said in that draft license that they weren't going to disclose exactly what they're funding, just areas that they're funding, right? Because they need very broad flexibility and authorizations. So I think that's just another kind of data point that shows you that they were really trying to push this forward no matter what, and we're going to arrive at the conclusion they wanted no matter what.
Adam Kredo, senior writer of foreign policy and national security for the Washington Free Beacon. Ted Cruz and 18 or so other Republicans actually sent a letter to the Biden administration calling for this Palestinian aid to be halted until these measures could be put in place to prevent it from benefiting terrorists. Now, is there a way to know if this money ultimately did benefit the terrorists? Is there a way to track this money?
Yeah, well, theoretically, the State Department has safeguards and, rails on the money, and they're performing due diligence and oversight. However, in practice, we haven't always seen that's the case. I reported just a while back that even though the Taylor Force Act, this is the law that stops aid from making its way to the Palestinians until they stop paying terrorists. Despite this law being in effect, the State Department produced their own internal assessment that I got a hold of not too long ago that said the Palestinian Authority has not ceased the pay to slave program, but yet aid is still flowing to them. So again, I think this is another example of kind of pushing forward with your head down to get this policy you want, while ignoring the realities on the ground that are inconvenient for that policy.
So where does it go from here? I mean, this is a story that is, of course, beginning to percolate thanks to your reporting and others, and I'm assuming. So now where does this go? How do we hold the Biden administration accountable? How do we demand that there be some tracking or some confirmation that this money was not used for terrorists? I mean, it sounds like it was. What can the Republicans do, if anything?
Well, luckily, with a GOP-controlled House, I think there's a lot of oversight angles, whether it be the House Foreign Affairs Committee or the oversight committees that have jurisdiction over the State Department. I think that they can very clearly force the State Department and the Biden administration to turn over any information about what happened to these $8 in the years since 2021 when they started pushing that forward. That would be the next steps that I would expect to see from Congress, somebody like a Ted Cruz, who's already expressed interest in the issue and put out a statement in response to my story today. So I would expect to see that happening, and I would expect there to be a lot of interest from Republican lawmakers in oversight positions to kind of get to the bottom of what this is. And we also don't know, by the way, if the State Department, when it applied for this exemption from anti-terrorism laws, if they actually sent that assessment over to the Treasury Department. This was in a draft. They may have deleted it before sending, which raises a host of other questions.
Unbelievable. There is another story out there that just broke a few hours ago. I don't know how long this has been going on. I just saw it. They do call this breaking news. GOP Democratic lawmakers urging President Biden to resolve a delay in transferring oil off of a seized Iranian tanker. So I'm gonna sort of give the headline, then let you fill in the blanks. Adam Kredo joining us, senior writer of foreign policy and national security for the Washington Free Beacon. Apparently, there's this tanker that was commandeered by the U.S. Earlier this year, and they were transferring sanctioned Iranian oil to Singapore. And so we commandeered this vessel, and it had a ton of oil on it. I mean, I guess is it millions of barrels of oil. And so we've had this boat now, 800,000 barrels of oil valued at a total of $56 million. And so this tanker has been sitting out off the coast of Texas, and apparently the Biden administration is afraid to take this oil off of this tanker because we're afraid that Iran is going to somehow retaliate. Talk a little bit about this, because I just saw this a little bit ago, and the story fascinates me.
Yeah, so it has been going on for several months, and you are correct. The main factor here is that Iran has said quite clearly that they'll continue attacking ships, continue attacking U.S. and ally interests in the region if this oil is actually removed from the tanker, if the U.S. goes ahead and takes that oil out and repatriates it and, makes the oil profits from it. This is also bound up in a much larger issue that I think is very important for context here, and that's Iranian oil sales themselves. They have increased exponentially under the Biden administration, and even though sanctions are on the book prohibiting Iran from sending this oil, which, by the way, primarily goes to China, the Biden administration has not enforced these sanctions. The question is why? It's because they want a nuclear deal with Iran, and instead of actually waiving sanctions, which would be a whole to-do and make a lot of news, they just kind of turn a blind eye to it. Now, Republicans in Congress have made an issue out of this already. I've reported in the past couple of weeks and months that Senator Joni Ernst and others have been probing the Biden administration over this, raising the question as to why they're not seizing more ships. We've only seized one ship in months and months, if not years at this point, even though we've had intelligence information on about half a dozen tankers that Iran is illegally operating. So I think that actually goes to show you the why of this being such an important issue, that on one hand, the Biden administration is shunning enforcement of the sanctions on the books. Two, they're not actually seizing ships when they should. And three, when they actually do take the action to seize a ship, they're hesitant to move forward with what they're supposed to do because they're caving to one, Iranian demands, and two, Iranian threats to continue wreaking havoc in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, and as part of the problem, too, you said a lot of this Iranian oil is going to China. Is this also, a give up to China?
Yeah, it could be in a certain respect. I think primarily it's to grease the wheels for a nuclear deal, but certainly the fact that it benefits China and can help kind of thaw relations with them, I don't think that's lost on the Biden administration. I mean, it's not like this information is secret. We know exactly where this oil is going. We know the profits. It's, totaling close to about $50 billion in the past couple of years, which is a huge lifeline for a regime that is already cash-strapped and needs access to cash. And, the fact that it's primarily the Chinese benefiting it, I don't think should surprise anybody.
It's interesting. When you have the government, federal government, the Biden administration currently, and they throw down these sanctions, it always looks great, with headlines, we're sanctioning Iran, we're sanctioning Russian oligarchs, and, we're out to get Vladimir Putin, we're sanctioning those close to Vladimir Putin. But in reality, number one, it doesn't seem like we're sanctioning hard enough, especially when it comes to, Russia, the lead up to their invasion of Ukraine. But when you also, I'm assuming it doesn't come as any surprise to anyone that Joe Biden is not enforcing these sanctions. He's not, absconding with these ships like he should if they're breaking the sanctions. Is it any wonder that, I don't want to lead the witness, is this part of the reason why we are losing respect on the world stage? Like, what is the impact of our reputation on the world stage when, China and Russia and North Korea and Iran see that we're feckless in this regard?
Yeah, I think you raise a very important point because, of course, foreign policy is not just one decision but many small decisions. And I think lack of enforcing sanctions, it's great to put them on the books, but you actually have to enforce them for them to make any sense and for them to have any impact. So not enforcing them, I think, says a lot to countries like Iran, certainly to countries like Russia and China, even though they're subject to various sanctions, that they're not really being enforced so they can continue doing the bad things that they're doing, whether it be in the Middle East or it be in the Pacific with China and even in North Korea. I think the message sent is very clear, and this is why allies like the Saudi Arabians, for instance, have lost faith in us, that we're wheeling and dealing with Iran. We're isolating the Israelis. We're isolating Saudi Arabia, two very strong allies in that region. And for those who want to be friends with us, they're left wanting, and they're left asking, well, why?
Well, they can't trust us. And that's the problem, right? I mean, they can't trust us. They don't know, what Biden's going to say. They don't know what he's actually going to do. And so I think that is part of the overall problem with the Biden administration on many fronts, including most certainly from a foreign policy standpoint. Last question, Adam Kredo, with senior writer of foreign policy and national security for the Washington Free Beacon. It's been 2 years since the failed pullout of Afghanistan. This has been a big conversation here in the last couple of days, certainly. And it's my contention that the real big problems with the Biden administration started from that point, and from a foreign policy standpoint, from an approval rating in America, it doesn't seem like Joe Biden has recovered from the horrific pullout. Would you agree with that? It doesn't seem like on the American stage and on the world stage, the president has been able to recover from that really horrible pullout.
Well, certainly Americans remember, and that's bared out with polling where the question is asked over several months, going all the way back to when they pulled out and up to now. The issue isn't going anywhere, particularly with GOP oversight in the House. But, this also goes back to something we were saying earlier when it comes to the money that's being released to the Palestinians, despite Hamas benefiting from it. And that's what the State Department said very clearly there, that we're moving forward with this because it's our foreign policy objective. This is the same thing you have with Afghanistan. The intelligence warning said don't do it. They were told that once they decided to go with it, to do it differently. They didn't heed any of these warnings because it wasn't the foreign policy objective that they wanted. So they made it happen, and the results, I think, on all of these issues speak for themselves.
Great conversation. Adam Kredo, senior writer of foreign policy and national security for the Washington Free Beacon. 528 on WMAL. Dan Mandis in for Vince Coglianese. Coming up after the news, fascinating conversation. The latest on artificial intelligence and its threat to you and your job in our country. It's all straight ahead on News Talk 105.9 WMAL. 536 on 105.9 WMAL. Dan Mandis in for Vince Coglianese. Appreciate you being here. The threats to your job, thanks to AI, artificial intelligence. There's been a lot of conversation about that, Chat GPT and so forth. Jennifer Sheets is author of the book Human Capital Lifeline, Revolutionizing Corporate Success, One Employee at a Time. And I think, Jennifer, the word employee is important in the title of your book, because for a lot of workplaces, they're trying to go to Chat GPT and artificial intelligence to try to help them succeed. The problem is that we are now seeing some issues with artificial intelligence and Chat GPT, and I think that we're seeing that not only here in America, but also abroad. So let's start off with just the basics of artificial intelligence and Chat GPT and talk about the jobs that are most at risk. Then we're going to go into the challenges that companies are facing as they try to incorporate AI and Chat GPT. But right now, as it stands, because it feels like it's always changing, what are the current jobs that are in danger of being essentially extinct thanks to AI?
Well, thank you for having me on the show today, Dan. I truly appreciate it. And this topic is in my wheelhouse. I'm very passionate about it. And when you talk about jobs, I think typically people think that they're manufacturing jobs. They think of like bots automating an assembly line and whatnot. But what they don't realize is that if a computer can do your job better than you can, then you're not going to have a job. I mean, right now they have HR platforms that take over so many roles. They advertise it on TV so you can see it, and they don't need an HR department. They don't need a payroll department. They can outsource it. They have finance jobs, legal jobs, paralegal jobs. You name it. There are 78 million jobs that are going to be automated within the next 5 to 8 years.
78 million. That is incredible. Now, when you say that there's 78 million jobs are going to be automated, does that mean that 78 million people will be out of work, or does that mean that the workforce is changing and that it can perhaps, anyway, embrace artificial intelligence? What does that actually mean from a number standpoint?
It's a challenge because it's kind of a little bit of both. I think the argument, there's two sides to this argument. The one side of the argument is that there's going to be new jobs out there and new ways to do things, that you're going to get to learn new opportunities. But what they're not taking into consideration, I call it the technology apocalypse, for the lack of a better analogy for it, because what's going to happen is you're not going to have enough people that have the knowledge and training to take up this kind of technology, to take over at the speed of which every company and school and everybody's trying to do and keep up. But it's like keeping up with the Joneses for technology. And so what's going to happen is you're going to have a gap of people that know how to do those roles, and those people that were not, like, you're forcing people that may not have been their wheelhouse, that not be their strong suit, or even something that they're interested in, to go back and have some kind of education to learn how to do it, because that's going to be the jobs that are going to be there for them in the future, not what they typically are used to.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of folks who may be of a certain age who are looking at this and hearing the stories, and they are worried. But now part of what we're finding out is, we learn more about artificial intelligence and Chat GPT and so forth, is that there have actually been some issues, some challenges with companies trying to incorporate this into, their company corporate culture. Talk about the challenges that these companies are facing.
People don't realize is that when we talk about algorithms and computers learning and learning machines, and those that are listening out there that sit on both sides of it can have an argument, we could go on for days, Dan, and talk about this, and we just don't have the time. But to kind of in a nutshell, I'm going to tell you that what's going to happen is that what it affects and why the challenge is because it is biased and it is discriminatory. It's only as good as what the developer, the person programming it originally puts in and comes up with as all of the parameters to encompass it. The thing of it is that we're in a society where things are ever changing, whether it's our culture, the area we live in, the slang that we use. One of the basic descriptions that people can kind of understand is like if I drive a forklift in one part of the country, it may be a tow motor in another, it may be in a high-low in another, and whatnot. And so somebody's like putting all of these descriptions in, and not just in like a human resource or staffing, but this goes across the board. They're putting in all of these things, and it's limited to as fast as they can put that information in or what their knowledge is. And so what happens is you also have people that may not have access to this information. You have Chat GPT, of which Elon Musk talked about, that now he's creating his own separate competitor to it because he thinks it's dangerous. And you can look up a lot of articles online about it. You can hear his conversations about it. And it doesn't matter whether you're a fan of him or not. The fact of the matter is there is some danger because what we're doing is we're falling into a society where we're letting, instead of machines and learning and technology help us, maybe get a faster cancer diagnosis or understand the way to make a process easier and quicker for us to be able to get our jobs done or live life better, we're actually being subservient to it, and we're actually making it make a decision for us. And there is a big difference between the two.
Oh, it's a huge difference. And I think,
right.
Our society is going to get lazier as a result. And so that's going to be a big part of this. And so, there's been a lot made of schools that are now actually looking to banning the Chat GPT. I guess students are finding a way around those bans. And I know that,
right.
Colleges and universities, they're finding, some of these term papers and so forth, they're being written by artificial intelligence. And so you have these college students who know where to find a term paper online and essentially have it written for them. And universities are realizing that as this technology evolves, we are going to end up with, kids that are in elementary and high school now going up into the college level who don't know how to really do anything for themselves or think critically because they're allowing the computer to do it all for them. And schools and colleges are beginning to sound the alarm.
And that's what I was saying, like being subservient to technology. And I think there's even there's someone out there from Tractor Supply Company, and there's another person with John Deere, and then in that whole area that have talked about this because they've seen it affect in their industries as well. Is that when it's a problem because you're not going to have a society that actually understands and knows how to do things. And again, we become bowing down to what the technology is that we built. And it's just like all of us now, right? I mean, I'm of the older generation. I mean, our parents sent us out, and we came home when the streetlights came on, and nobody, we didn't have pagers and phones and everything to know where we were. And now we've adapted to the fact that we can't go anywhere without our phone. We feel like it's a lifeline to whatever we're doing. It's the same thing with this. I mean, the students just say something into their phone, and it finds it for them. It creates it. It can create a paper. And I know, Dan, you and I talked about on one of your previous shows about the writer's strike and how there's the Jasper.ai, which is the whole point of what started everything with that was because you can write a script by just saying words in, and it comes up with a script, and you just give it to maybe one writer to tweak and make it conversational so everyone can understand. But it really wrote the whole thing, and it eliminates a bunch of jobs. And so, but like you were saying, we're not becoming smarter; we're becoming dumber, essentially, and that's the scary part.
Well, it is, and I think that part of what you do, you're of course an author, you're an expert in many things, and part of what you do is you work with companies, you interface with companies to try to staff their needs, and you try to couple people looking for jobs with these companies that have needs, and so part of what you're finding, and we're reading about this these days, is that these folks that are coming out of college, these students that are graduating college, they don't know as much as they need to, and they're lacking in an abundance of practical skills. That's not only, by the way, AI's fault, if you will, but that's also the fault of the colleges because of what they're choosing to teach these kids and not teach these kids. And so I think companies are now looking at these college graduates, and they're not sure if they're ready for the real world.
Oh, without question, and it's really sad because we've really come to a point right now in society where excuses are a lot of what we live by, right? And then you've got professors and there are definitely institutions with professors and leaders and teachers in there that maybe, are forward thinking or maybe have been in the business world and use some of that business acumen when they're actually talking to their students and teaching them things. But really what we've come down to is they have a linear lens, a linear way of thinking, right? And then they teach that way, and they don't have real world experience of what's going on. And so it's almost like they can't decipher when kids are using AI. As a matter of fact, there's actually a poll about that says like only 17% of, I think it was in the Stanford Daily, that 17% of the people out there that were in the college realm didn't know that a paper was written by AI. And so we're doing, like, essentially what you're saying, Dan, is like we're putting people out that don't have the skill sets, and companies are seeing it because within the first 1 to 3 years that they come into the workforce, the amount of training that's having to be done and the amount of even entitlement that comes with, if I don't like it or I didn't understand it, I can just go find something else. And we're not getting that longevity on the front end of a career that we had years ago. And a lot of this is coming because they just don't have that practical experience. What's in a book is not real world.
And here's the other thing. I'm sitting here and I'm I'm listening to what you're saying, and yes, I am a man of a certain age, and I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, well, this makes the older employees to a company. It sounds like it might make the older employees actually more desirable because older employees like us, we do have those real world practical experiences.
Without question, but what's interesting about that, I'm glad you brought that point up because you and I talked about this before, a few months back, about bringing up the fact that in the older generation, the way that they're not being able to be heard by certain companies and the hierarchy of them and having to go, they build their companies a certain way, right? It's like a collegiate kind of based way. It's by the book. And then when you bring in that type of leadership in, when they get with the older generation, I don't think they have anything to offer. But what's interesting is over 50% of all new millionaires and billionaires are over the age of 45. They are not of the younger generation. And it's because people in the older generation are kind of getting fed up and they're having ideas and they don't like the way things are going, or they think they can run more efficient. And on top of that, they don't settle. Like what's happened now is you've got so much blockchain streamline and everything. It's like a company will take the plus or 3 minus in profit, loss, or gain just to keep the same cost under that line item in their financials. And so they don't realize that maybe if they took and carved out a piece of it, like let's talk about the people that are your talent you surround yourself with, your lifeline. This is what I talk about in my book. If we could guarantee human nature, we'd be trillionaires, and everyone keeps trying to capture lightning in a bottle, and it's just not going to happen. And they think they get close, and they're satisfied with plus or minus 3. And no one should ever be satisfied with that. And that's why the older generation has stepped out, and they've said, okay, we're going to create our own way of doing it, and they're being successful at it. And I just wish that the future generations coming up could take some of the pages out of those books, because I'll tell you what, there's some bright young people out there, and they've been exposed to things that Hannah, you and I never had the opportunity to be exposed to, and could just create great things for all of us. But I think that it's really just presented a way of being complacent, which is dangerous, and lazy on top of all of it.
Well, let me ask you, Jennifer Sheets, author of the book Human Capital Lifeline, Revolutionizing Corporate Success, One Employee at a Time. Amazon bestseller, by the way. Congratulations. So
thank you, Dan.
If you've got folks that are listening right now and maybe, they're younger, maybe they've got kids that are, in high school, maybe college, whatever, is there a way to embrace ChatGPT or embrace artificial intelligence without becoming overly dependent on it? In other words, you master artificial intelligence so that you use it for your own success as opposed to utilizing it and then making you lazy and complacent.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why, initially we talk about, I think one of the first Western countries to ban ChatGPT was Italy.
Yes.
And one of the reasons was because of the liability that came with it. Because what's happening is there's information that's not accurate, and it's putting it as fact, and it's plagiarizing, and it's doing all kinds of things, and there's such a liability to it. And so I think that if you can do two things, one, you've got to carve that piece out of it to where it is more accurate in that sense, which I don't know how it can be. I mean, that's where people a lot smarter than I am that make a lot more money than I do can figure out. But the idea is you have to protect yourself from that, and you have to figure out a way for it to not be discriminatory, and first and foremost. And then the challenge becomes you have to have a society educated enough to tell the difference, and a society that can use it, like I said, in making improvement in processes or finding solutions to, for example, we've talked about before, my son had leukemia 3 times. I've spent so many years with pediatric cancer in my life. And I will tell you that one of the things that saved his life was being able to get on a Facebook page that talked to people from other countries about treatments that they were doing and trying to come up with things that would work for my son. That's the type of thing that I envision, like an AI and a supercomputer and stuff is making that faster, more available, readily available to be able to improve survival rates and the types of different, cures and medicines and things that we use. That's what I envision it do. But what's happened is that everyone is in a race to find out who can be the best at coming out with the newest thing, and they're not looking at all the pitfalls that come with it. So to answer your question, Dan, I really think that it's going to boil down to controlled growth, just like in a business. The only way you're successful in a business is through controlled growth. Right now, you're just seeing a rapid run to this technology without regard to all of the other fallout that comes with it. So we need to slow down a little bit and have controlled growth with it, and then I think it can be an amazing asset to our lives.
Yeah, there's an abundance of pitfalls, and there's a lot of fallout dealing with artificial intelligence and ChatGPT, certainly. And Jennifer Sheets, author of the book Human Capital Lifeline, Revolutionizing Corporate Success, One Employee at a Time. You can find it on Amazon. It is a bestseller. Jennifer, thank you very much. It is 5:52. 5:57 on WMAL. Dan Mandis here on News Talk 105.9 FM WMAL. Appreciate you listening. The great one, Mark Levin, is up next. By the way, a lot of folks finding me on social media. You can find me on the socials. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter or X, whatever it is that you want to call it. Also on Instagram. All of those at Dan Mandis Show. If you'd like to find me, that's where I'm at. I've kind of given up on social media just because it is just an abyss of stupidity. Although there's a lot of very good conservative hosts to follow on social media. If you'd like to follow me again, it's at Dan Mandis Show. As I said, Mark Levin is coming up next. Thanks for listening. News Talk 105.9 FM, WMAL.